Ben heaved another basket full of food onto Ernest's wagon. After the attack on the cabin earlier that day, everyone was working overtime to gather what they could and leave. Even Avery's kids were helping out by tossing in the occasional loose apple or berry. Blick came around from behind the cabin, bent over with something big on his back. "What's all that?" Ben questioned the hunched dwarf. "I made new wheels, lad." Blick dropped them on the ground and got to work detaching one wheel from the wagon. "I ain't having this wagon roll with all our things on these sorry excuses of locomotion." The crooked wheel fell, and Blick quickly moved a new one into place. Ben eyed the old wheel as it lay on the ground. The thing was hardly round, with its outermost edge jutting inward and outward from the center randomly. The hub of the wheel had also been built at a slight angle, so the wheel wouldn't even sit straight on its axle. How Ernest managed to haul the heavy cart around on wheels like this, Ben couldn't fathom. He nodded at Blick for making a wise decision to make new ones. A sharp wooden crack caught their attention. They both looked to the cabin's porch where Ernest was making new bolts for his crossbow. Ben walked over to him. "Ernest, did you break something?" Ernest laughed. "No, Ben," his gravely voice said in that kind tone he innately carried. "It's just my curse," he continued, fixing a head onto another bolt. "Whenever I create something, it becomes as crooked as I am." He held up the finished bolt. Straight as an arrow ought to be, and masterful in its craftsmanship. Nothing crooked about it. In the blink of an eye, the bolt's shape shot into a random crooked mess. No splinters, no breaking. It just spontaneously changed to an erratic shape and looked like it had been made that way. "Does that happen to everything you make?" Ben asked, shocked by what he had just witnessed. "Yep, absolutely everything. No exception." "When did this start?" Ben tilted his head, still eyeing the crooked bolt. Ernest took a moment to think. "About 3 years after I married my wife. I helped a woman on my way home whose cart had gotten stuck at the side of the road. She looked like she hadn't eaten for a while, so I invited her home for a meal." Ernest paused to sigh. "Ended up being the biggest mistake of my life. She must have had some kind of issue with married men, because as soon as she laid eyes on my wife, she became hostile toward both of us." Ernest paused again, taking in a breath that rattled through his nose. "Turned out she was a witch, and she put a curse on me. She accused me of being a crooked deceiver, so the curse made me and everything I made as crooked as you see now. In that instant, all my bones became misshapen. My house and cart crumpled into unremarkable shapes as I had built them both myself. And my wife..." He hesitated and raised a hand to his mouth. "But," Ben started, "you didn't make your wife." "No," Ernest remarked, "but I did make a family with her." Ben's eyes went wide. "She was with child at the time, and the baby suddenly changing shape inside her not only killed it, but injured her internally." Ernest sniffed again and wiped away a tear. "She bled out from the inside and soon died." Ben's ears dropped, and he could feel a tear of empathy welling in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "No, it's all right." Ernest took the bolts he had finished and put them into a crooked quiver. "We all have our own past. Knowing each other's helps us trust each other." The sorrow of his past was audible in his wavering voice. He glanced at the fallen dogwood beside the cabin. Ben walked back to the wagon where Blick had finished installing the other wheel. "How's that, lad?" the dwarf remarked, bellowing with pride. "No more rocky rides for this set of wheels." He kicked one of the wheels to show off the sturdiness of his handiwork. "Won't be falling off neither." Marge came outside with a large basket over her shoulder. Avery followed right behind her, carrying a stack of folded cloth. "I think that's the last of what's going to fit," Marge said, dropping the basket on the cart. Red came out and ran to Ben, her newly cleaned cloak waving behind her as she grabbed onto his legs. Ben picked her up and held her by his side as he watched Umpty come out of the house. "That's all we're taking," Umpty called from the cabin's front door. "We should get moving now." "I agree," Ernest remarked, strapping his quiver full of bolts to a belt that crossed his chest. I say we head south toward the dark forest. He raised a hand and pointed in the general direction. Not many people live there, so there's likely not a lot of ghouls. Bah! Blick cried. Bollocks to that. We should head to me and my brother's mine. No safer place in the land. For once, the dwarf seemed to smile behind his thick beard. And run into your ghoulish brothers down there, with no way out and 10,000 tons of mountain suspended over our heads on wooden beams? Umpty argued. I should think not. I vote we go back east. I know of an old fortress at the edge of the Pale Forest there. It's safe and by design a defensible location. Ernest stomped as he turned to Umpty. East happens to be where the kingdom's largest town and the castle are, he grumbled. The dark forest is out of the way and far from any large settlement. Ben pushed into the argument. Look, does anyone have a coin? I say we flip. A coin? Blick remarked. We gave 3 suggestions. How would that work? Because I agree with Umpty about your suggestion, Blick. Ben glared at the dwarf with his ears tilted back. We don't want to be trapped underground with no way out. Blick huffed and leaned against the wagon wheel with his arms crossed. Ernest produced a copper coin from a pocket in his coat. Heads we go to the dark forest. He held the coin to show the head side. Tails, we go to this hidden fortress of yours. He glared at Umpty as he turned the coin to show the other side. With a flick of his thumb and a sharp metal ping, the coin flew upward, flashing as sunlight reflected off the spinning surface. Ernest snatched the coin from the air and slapped it onto the back of his other hand. He removed his hand from the coin so everyone could clearly see that it had landed tails. Ernest groaned. This is still a bad idea, but the copper has decided. He stepped around to the front of the cart and took the handlebars. He kept his gaze on Umpty until they started moving. Ben came up next to him. You all right, Ernest? Ernest leaned in to whisper. I don't trust this man. Something about him doesn't seem right. Ben glanced back to Umpty, who walked just behind him, focused on the areas beside the cart, hand on his sword. The one eye that wasn't covered by his bandages didn't seem to scan the horizon at all, like he wasn't actually looking for something. Ben turned back to face the way they were headed. He clutched his spear tightly as he glanced to Red sitting at the front of the cart. He had no reason to suspect Umpty, but if the guardsman or anyone or anything else jeopardized him or Red, Ben wouldn't hesitate to act.